Our reading this morning is from Psalm 139, verses 1 through 18. Listen now for God's word. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all of my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in behind and before. You lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, the depths, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall guide me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light around me become night, well, even darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. For it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works that I know very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes beheld my unformed substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them yet existed. How weighty are your thoughts to me, O Lord! How vast is the sum of them! I try to count them. They are more than the sand. I come to the end. I am still with you. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This has long been a very favorite psalm of mine. It has this sense of God's loving presence with us, that we are fully known by God, and that we are loved for being children of God, that whenever we feel farthest from God, lonely or alone, God is still there with us, that we are wonderfully made, that we are held close behind and before, held by God, and that God is with us. Over the years, though, as I read this, I see the way that the language of this psalm, in addition to being this great comfort, could also be pretty unsettling, too. If God is ever present, then perhaps God is inescapable, too. Of course, the two might go together, that God knows us through and through. That can be a statement of comfort, that God knows us through and through, or a statement of inescapability. God knows me through and through. In any case, it's that pairing of those that can be a comfort, but it's a comfort that's rooted in a truth, that God knows the truth about us, and God knows the truth about the world. And that then can be a statement of justice, of God's loving justice. For the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who we celebrate this Monday, he, after all, preached sermons. He was a reverend, so he preached sermons, and at Stanford they have a collection of his papers, searchable online, and he was preaching sermons as he led the people in the Montgomery bus boycott and the march from Selma to Montgomery and the March on Washington and the Poor People's Campaign, all of these. And as Dr. King preached through all of these and all these over all the years, his paper shows a few sermons and outlines that touch on this psalm. And they touch on that sense of the inescapability of God. So one, which is titled God the Inescapable, Dr. King looks at the ways that the psalm suggests that we as humans, in our lives, we try to escape God all the time. And he places those in kind of contemporary terms. In the terms of the psalm, if we try to escape, if we try to ascend to the heavens to escape God, well, that if we put our hopes in some kind of utopia, in a perfection, and all of that's how we escape to heaven, then that ignores our call to action, our responsibility that God places within us. So too, for Dr. King, if we make our bed in the depths, in Sheol, seeking to escape God through even death, Well, the same is true. We're trying to escape God. In going to the ends of the sea, King sees in our contemporary societies the busyness, the desire to cover the world with always active planning, staying busy in an attempt to escape God. In the end, King's notes for the sermon end that we should let our minds, like maddening water, run back to the sea of divinity. Wonderful words from a wonderful man. In another sermon called Fleeing from God, Dr. King pairs this psalm text about God being inescapable with the story of the prophet Jonah. Jonah, of course, ends up getting eaten by a whale, and the reason he's getting eaten by a whale is he is running from what God is asking him to do. He's attempting to flee from God's call upon him as a prophet. And so for King, all of this story about running from God, about avoiding God, well, that was paired with the moment of the times. And when he preached that in 1950, I think it's April 1956, he preaches that he's preaching that in the middle of the Montgomery bus boycotts. And all of that was paired with this specific moment when the city of Montgomery was defying court orders to end their segregationist practices. And so as King is preaching this about God being inescapable, about God chasing after Jonah, about God being with us wherever we find ourselves, in the words of the psalm, well, that Dr. King saw in that and saw in the words of Jonah in the psalm a message of human desire and human hopes to flee from God and flee from responsibility. And so a newspaper from the time includes that King prayed as part of this service, as part of this sermon, prayed that God would give the leaders of the Montgomery City Commission the wisdom to see the vision of goodness in the cradle of the Confederacy. Because King was preaching this to those folks who were deciding whether to continue with the Montgomery bus boycotts, all of which, set off by Rosa Parks, had led all this to taking place, had led all this, and the people were deciding what to do as the city was seeking to defy the courts. And so in this, we have this vision that Dr. King has, of loving and compassionate justice. King sees those fleeing from God as being human. That's part of what it means to be human, is to try to flee from God. It's human and it's personal that we all have a desire to flee from God. King is seeing his opponents as human in all of this, as a part of what this is. And while he could see the humanity in their response, that was not enough to let him off of the injustice of their response. He saw in their response the defiance of God's will. He saw in their response fleeing from God, and that ultimately fleeing from God, as with Jonah getting swallowed by a whale, fleeing from God, seeking to avoid those consequences, all of that ultimately bears with it those consequences when the truth comes to light. All of that comes with a moment for an individual. When we have fled from God too long, the individual is called to see the truth of where they are, reckon with the truth of where they've done wrong, and to see those moments with clarity, and in clarity, justice. In our life today, in this week, we celebrate and observe Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We celebrate Martin Luther King Day on Monday, and this week we will also be celebrating an inauguration on Wednesday. We are drawn to consider, as both of these celebrations occur, we are drawn to consider the events of last week. In the face of that insurrectionist violence at the U.S. Capitol, a common refrain that I heard and saw in the news and elsewhere was that this is not who we are. This is not who we are. That statement has a lot of power. It is an aspirational statement, and it has tremendous rhetorical value. By saying this is not who we are, to borrow from Lincoln's first inaugural address, We are appealing to the better angels of our nature in saying, this is not who we are. This is not who we hope to be as individuals or as a country. And we can all hope that this is not who we are. And yet, when we pair that with the clarity of this psalm and the wisdom of Dr. King brought to it, Dr. King saw in this passage of the psalm that saying this is not who we are might be a kind of fleeing from God to the heavens, ascending to the heavens, replacing the truth with a utopian dream, a utopian hope that does not reflect reality. And as King shows in his readings of this passage, fleeing from God in such a way will ultimately require us at some point to grapple with the truth, to grapple with clarity and with justice about what truly is. And the truth is that by virtue of it even happening in our country, in our time, this is who we are. When we let that statement sit with us, to recognize the role that white supremacy plays in so many places, to recognize the role that separation, division, prejudice, white privilege, that all of these things take, all of that is part of who we are. All of that is part of what we must grapple with as a nation. To not flee by saying this is not who we are, though I agree with those intentions. I hope that is not who we are. But instead, we are called to recognize with clear eyes that our true unity with God and our true unity with each other, our true unity as a country, that unity truly comes when we do not seek to escape the truth, but instead to seek out forgiveness. When we do not avoid truths, dark as they might be, but bring them out into the light. When we do not flee from God, but instead stop to listen to God, as in our passage from John this morning, when Jesus said to Nathanael, "Follow me." No longer fleeing from God, but listening when we are called to follow God. That true unity comes in those moments of stopping, listening, seeking out forgiveness from those we have wronged, seeking to amend our ways and to reconcile, and recognizing with clarity the inescapability of God. So as we engage with this psalm, as we engage with the memory of Dr. King, as we engage with the gospel, as we engage in our faith and engage with our God, as we engage with these times we are living in, let us not seek to flee from God, but instead to follow Jesus. Let us not seek to flee from the truth, but instead seek to follow Jesus when Jesus says, "Follow me." And then we follow Jesus into deep love for our neighbors, into turning the other cheek, into feeding the hungry and welcoming the stranger. Let us follow Jesus, and in following, turn from all the fleeing we might do, and instead turn to embrace the inescapable God who knows us, who loves us, who, even when we come to the end, is still with us. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. And the Lord said, "Follow me." Thanks be to God. Amen.